Welcome everyone to Half History Will Travel. I am your host, the Wilder Historian, and I'm betting that when you think of Joseph Stalin, the leader of the Soviet Union who ruled with an iron fist, that you would not think of him as a tree hugger. Well, in fact he was, to some extent. He wasn't an environmentalist in the way we use the term now, but he definitely promoted afforestation of the Russian steppe for different ideological reasons. So in this video, I will be diving into a complicated history of the Russian steppe and the minds and actions of Soviet conservationists. First, let's discuss what the steppe is. It is the product of a steppe climate, which is a region too dry to support a forest, but not dry enough to be a desert. So we get a plain consisting of short grass and sometimes shrubs, but little to no trees. Think of the American Great Plains. It is an example of a steppe type of region. The Russian steppe is located in the southern and central portion of the then Soviet Union. Throughout the 19th century, the Russian people idealized the steppe. The people began to see the expanding plains as an Asiatic intrusion, much like the Mongols under Genghis Khan. Thus, they saw the expansion of the arid environment that prevented the growth of trees as the Russian country losing its Russianness, and by extension, its people lost their Russianness. That was a concern and a crisis in many of their minds. We see the United States go through a similar crisis when the 1890 census declared there to be no frontier. Historian Frederick Jackson Turner saw the frontier as a process by which Americans became Americans. It was through the trials of forging trails and building towns and cities in what they perceived as wilderness that cultivated a sense of independence and made it possible for a democratic republic-style government to emerge. In the late 1800s in Russia, a bad drought brought Tsar Alexander III to enlist the help of Vasily Dokhachev to investigate why it was happening. The soil conservationists viewed the bad agricultural practices of farmers as one of, if not the main culprit, and recommended water conservation and the planting of trees to break up the wind that made the environment so desolate. After the revolution of 1917, the more powerful leaders who emerged like Vladimir Lenin and Joseph Stalin became interested in the plan. One of the reasons those men became so concerned about afforestation was the need for agriculture to take off within the Soviet economy. At first, the Commissariat of Agriculture oversaw the afforestation, but it became overwhelmed by the chaotic agricultural collectivization program, and the poor support from the people led the program to flounder. Stalin then ordered the creation of a state bureau called a Main Administration of Forest Protection and Afforestation. In Russian, it was abbreviated to GLO. The Bureau produced its own publications and offered an education in forestry to those seeking a job in that line of work. The scientific research done to analyze the best species and ways to plant those trees led to great success compared to the Commissariat of Agriculture's attempts. The mortality rate of the trees steeply declined, and the Bureau was graduating many individuals from its institution. The Second World War basically put a halt to the program, but once the war ended, the Bureau was reinvigorated. A great change came to the program in the post-war years. The GLO became, in April 1947, the much more powerful Ministry of Forest Management. Its creation was the most radical of all reforms in the history of Soviet forestry, according to Dr. Stephen Brain. Collectively, between the Soviet Union and its satellite states, 1.5 million hectares of forests were to be planted, but the progress went at a snail's pace. During a conference in the late 1940s between some of the top foresters and leaders in the Soviet Union, the Great Stalin Plan for the Transformation of Nature was hashed out. The program expanded tremendously from 1.5 million hectares to 5.7 million, but repurposed to join a larger effort, changing the climate of the country as a whole. The centerpiece of the Stalin Plan would be the construction of 8 enormous shelter belts. Their walls of foliage intended to screen dry winds rushing in from Central Asia, thereby rendering southern Russia as cool and moist as Moscow. The new forests would extend across 16 provinces and 204 districts, over an area equal to that of Britain, France, Italy, Belgium, and the Netherlands combined. If they were arranged in a single belt 30 meters across, they would circle the Earth 50 times. It was a robust plan, but now it had a new goal: to demonstrate the power of the Communist Party and the Soviet Union over nature itself. They claimed that capitalist countries could not harness the manpower or the effort to bring about such an egalitarian initiative to improve the environment for their respective countries. It became an ideological war with the capitalist countries, just like the arms race. The Bureau was reorganized to hopefully cut through bureaucratic red tape by placing it directly under the Council of Ministers, but this also saw the introduction into the Bureau of Trofim Lysenko, a Ukrainian who had worked his way politically up the ladder to a high position within the government, but although he was unqualified to be in that position, he maneuvered in such a way to secure his placement and stayed one step ahead of his critics. He made up evidence to support his agricultural theories and sweet-talked the higher-ups in the Soviet Union by appealing to their desire to create a collective, as in the case with farmers, people working together for the common good, but in this case, it was trees acting as a collective. Before the evidence could even be tested, he put forward the nest method for afforestation. This plan was to plant trees, namely oaks, in a four-pointed star formation fairly close together, and he theorized that the trees would work together to get rid of weeds and other interlopers. Because the communication between the collective farmers and the Bureau was poor, no one knew exactly what they were supposed to do or how they were supposed to do it, which produced poor results in afforestation of farmland. It did not take long for the Bureau to find out that this method was not working the way that Lysenko had promised. By 1952, it was evident that a new way of afforestation was needed, and Lysenko's plan was scrapped in favor of a more proven method, but the project was hit with a devastating disaster. Joseph Stalin died in March 1953. With its biggest supporter gone, the Bureau would collapse. Those who opposed using so much effort and money for afforestation wasted no time in dismantling it. Just 6 days after Stalin's funeral, in a show of rejection of Stalin's forest policy, which had tended to favor forest conservation policy rather than the demands of the industrial bureaus, the duties of the Ministry of Forest Management were transferred to the Ministry of Agriculture. The timber-cutting bureaus were provided with a freer hand, and all programs related to forest health fell into deep decline. The number of workers assigned to forest management in Moscow fell from 927 to 342 in the space of 6 months, a drop of 62%, and then to 120 workers after a year. From the regional administrations, 701 workers out of 1,458 were let go. However, the Great Stalin Plan was not a total loss. Although Lysenko's plan did not work, the bureau that existed before and up to 1948 did a great job in increasing the yields of crops on farms where afforestation took place. So, what does this all mean to us? Well, I think we can learn a vital lesson from the political battlings within the Soviet Union over afforestation. We saw in the early stages of afforestation that although they had romantic ideals about reforesting the steppe, they went about it from a technocratic perspective, relying on scientific reasoning to lay out plans for the Bureau. However, Lysenko, a Promethean, meaning that he perceived Earth as a resource whose utility was determined primarily by human needs and interests, and whose environmental problems are overcome through human innovation, thought that human will could overcome the realities of nature. When Prometheanism took over the Bureau, it resulted in disaster because the scientific evidence did not back up the actions taken to bring a forest to the steppe. If you'd like to learn more about this, please read The Great Stalin Plan for the Transformation of Nature by Stephen Brain in the October 2010 issue of Environmental History. That is where this information and quotes in this video came from. Dr. Brain also published a book entitled Song of the Forest, Russian Forestry and Stalinist Environmentalism, 1905 to 1953. I hope you all enjoyed this video. I ran across this article thumbing through some old journal issues and thought it was an interesting read and dives into an aspect of the Soviet Union that you don't hear about. Thank you all so much for watching. Have a great day.
Historian, historian, where do you roam? Historian, historian, far, far from home. Have history will travel reads the card of a man, a professor with knowledge in the heartland. To educate the world is his mission. A professor of fortunism and called historian. Historian.